I don't know. Say it with me. I don't know. Good God, it is liberating. I am a towering mountain of ignorance. I don't know. We're taught to believe that everything has a reason. Now, I'm glad that we have the desire to understand the world. That results in all sorts of great stuff. We want to know everything. We're humans. We're curious. And maybe it's our culture. Maybe it's just humanity. But I think a lot of the time we end up mixing up thinking something with knowing something. Suddenly, I know that I don't know. But somehow everyone else seems to know. They all know differently from each other, but they all seem to know. What I'm saying is nobody's opinions are correct in the world. And yet it's impossible not to tie your opinions to your concept of self. And often people tie those things so closely together that they begin defending their guesses as if they're defending their very lives. In a way, they are. This is why it can be so impossible to talk about certain topics with certain people. They've tied those suppositions to themselves so tightly with knots of narrative and constructed reality and values that there's just no untying it. And maybe unsurprisingly, in those situations, the best course of action is just to be friends. The world as we perceive it, as we've built it inside of ourselves, is a lie that we tell to ourselves, not out of deception, but out of necessity. We simply cannot understand the world as it is, and so we construct. But sometimes I just have to tell myself the thing that is definitely true, the truest thing I can say, which is that I don't know.
This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Bob Pondillo and Cass Midgley.
So I had been obviously just tearing down the scaffolding piece by piece. I picture like a huge layers and layers of scaffolding around the beautiful reality of life that the church does. I'm walking out of Safeway. I'm pushing my cart, and I just realize it's gone. And I say out loud, love will have to be enough to hold me for now. That will have to be enough to hold me because I've got nothing left. I don't believe any of that structure.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 174 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Today, fellow ex-pastor Dave Warnock and I interview Shanna in Canada. After a portent encounter with God that left her searching for answers and doubting God's goodness, Shanna set out on a 3-year search to discover how the God she loved and devoted her life to could hunger for his own glory in the face of her suffering. In the process, she dismantled the scaffolding her Christian faith and dogma had built around life and love, deforming what it means to be human. She discovered that God is really the God of our imagination. It is in faith that we craft the God we need to meet the unmet needs of our lives. Shanna is a contemplative atheist on the journey of coming back to herself and the world, body and mind, after years of disembodied living perpetuated by belief and faith. In letting go of faith, she began discovering the gifts of being human by finding new life-giving rhythms to center her life inside the body and in trusting the lived experience. Shanna holds an MA in counseling and a certification in play therapy. She is a licensed clinical counselor and has been working in the field of trauma and child development for 11 years. The underlying theme of Shanna's story is disembodiment. She probably uses that word 20 times before I figure out what she's talking about. There are a few epiphanies in this talk, had by all, but Shanna, like many ex-Christians, found herself in a natural world, not a supernatural one, the real world, and she found it beautiful in its raw form. Religion tries to put clothes on reality to hide its ugly, shameful parts, but many of us peeked behind the covering and saw that it wasn't scary. The process of peeking was scary, but underneath was a beautiful body. Yeah, there's blemishes and irregularities and loneliness and fear and all the things that it means to be alive and human. But those of us who left faith embrace life's blemishes, including our own. Everything just is what it is, and the clothing is a way of saying no to it. Often the reason that the grand narrative of God is in control and working all things together for your good is so appealing is that life apart from that comforting narrative bangs with chaos and injustice. It rattles and throbs with unease and lack of settled significance or even hope. But it's the world in which we find ourselves, and saying no to it doesn't make it go away. It just hides it from our immature eyes. The real world is sometimes unnerving or banal. It is tactile and unpredictable, like the wind. The physical world, which includes our bodies, is foreign at first to the human who's been steeped in the metaphysical, but our lives become art, not dogma, dynamic, not static, wild, not controllable, physical, not metaphysical. Samuel Beckett, the 20th century Irish poet, contrasted art and metaphysics like this, quote, "Poetry is essentially the antithesis of metaphysics. Metaphysics purge the mind of the senses and cultivate the disembodiment of the spiritual. Poetry is all passionate and feeling and animates the inanimate. Metaphysics are most perfect when concerned with universals. Poetry when most concerned with particulars." Unquote. For me, art is my religion. The only world I want to live in is one seen through the lens of art and the freedom of art, the freedom to make mistakes, and they become part of the creation and are in fact absorbed into it and welcomed by it as that which gives the piece character and honesty. Also on the subject of embodiment, when I read Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me, which is framed as a letter to his teenage son on how to live in a black body in America, I was immediately struck with his ample use of the word body throughout, and how often he identified himself as his body. He calls disembodiment a form of terrorism. Perhaps you can see where a black person shunned and shamed for his skin color his whole life could be tempted to resent his own body and want to detach from it. But Coates defies the devaluation of his body and the mistake of disembodiment. Adolescent teenagers or even adults can look in the mirror, maybe naked in front of a full-body mirror, and dislike what they see and partake in a form of disembodiment. Christianity seems to convey that the human body is only good when God dwells there. In fact, that's its main purpose, to be a temple, a vessel for this seemingly greedy dictator who wants to own all the bodies and control them all. The Bible says you are not your own, you've been bought with a price. They do know that's the definition of slavery, right? They'll say, well, it's because he knows best. Well, it's a good thing God doesn't exist, because this is my body, and although I may or may not know what's best for it or practice it, it is a precious thing to me, and in fact the only thing I truly own on the earth. So politically speaking, I am a body anarchist, and I insist on my freedom. All the amazing functions of the body, eating, digestion even, looking at things, feeling things, sex, these are not ugly or sinful. These are amazing machines that took billions of years to evolve into what they are today. And the work that Shanna is doing, that she articulates so well today, is the integration of her whole self in embodiment. We taped this conversation on September 23rd, 2017. We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world's a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast or leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Our show's available on most podcast platforms. Also, you can support us monetarily in two easy ways. You can pledge $1 per episode or more through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA podcast. Or leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. The smallest contribution is truly greatly appreciated. If you're in the process of deconstructing your faith and would like to be added to our private support group on Facebook, friend me on Facebook, private message me that you'd like to be added, and give me a brief description of your deconversion journey. I do a small screening just to protect the confidentiality of the group. Our opening monologue is an excerpt from a YouTube by Hank Green titled Towering Mountain of Ignorance. The music behind it is Never Know by Jack Johnson. The segue music on this episode is a band called Oh Hello, a song called Dear Wormwood. Thanks for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is. So, wow. So here's the story. You wrote me. You've been listening to the show. I don't know. How long have you been listening to the show?
At least before I deconverted, so I'd say over 2 years.
That's longer than Cass and I have known each other. That's crazy.
Isn't that funny?
That's crazy.
Well, I feel like, I know, Cass, you've mentioned it before, but you're sort of like my, atheist pastor. So, yeah, no, I've listened to the podcast for 2 years.
Yeah, so Dave is also an ex-pastor, and we have this group here in Middle Tennessee, and literally, even as, right before we went on to tape this, we're talking about, people in our congregation.
We're pastoring them.
Yeah. And who are going through shit. And that's the thing, back when I was going to be a humanist chaplain on the Vanderbilt campus, people, think that that's oxymoronic, or everybody's going through shit and needs to talk to people anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's when I, reached out to you, Shanna, and it worked out. I know you were a little bit reluctant, but most people are.
My nervousness, I was saying to my husband today, isn't about sharing the deconversion piece, but it's more like a lot of people who write. I hear them say, they write, articulately, and then they go to speak, and it doesn't look remotely the same. So, so that would probably be my nervousness. But I see. Yeah, does that make sense?
Oh, it makes total sense.
Mm-hmm. Not every writer is a good speaker. Not every speaker is a good writer.
Exactly.
So let's go back to your childhood and your religious upbringing, and go from there.
Okay. So I guess I grew up in this weird hybrid of homeschooled. So I was exposed to sort of the Bill Gothard type of folks who you guys have talked about a bit before. Mm-hmm. So in my homeschooled life, I was exposed to those folks, but we never quite fit in there. Mm-hmm. I attended an Assemblies of God church. I grew up in that. My parents still attend the same church they did when I was young. Now that was probably the more worldly exposure versus the homeschooled group, right? So all my church friends went to public school and, were exposed to sort of, quote, the world. Mm-hmm. So there was always a sense I didn't fit into either place, but it's sort of this other layer, and it does matter to my religious life, which is we lived in the inner city. So when I was 7, my family, we moved to the ghetto, basically. That really also shaped who I became. And so when I say I was homeschooled, I feel like it's not the full picture because they were isolating us on the one hand, right? On the other hand, we were exposed to stuff most people are never exposed to. Yeah. So it was a strange kind of juxtaposition of things. My church life was probably one of the most beautiful gifts in my life. I think I kind of write about that a little bit, but in my letter to you, we can unpack that. But
yeah, was there move to the inner city missional? Was that purposeful that your parents wanted to go in ministry there?
No, but if you were to ask my mom today, I think she'd say it was missional for her family. So she wanted to stay home and homeschool us. And so financially, I think a move from our acreage outside of the city was necessary.
Well, you were starting to say about your church, and a lot of times everybody has a different experience with church, traumatized by it, and then actually great experience. And it sounds like you had a good experience.
Yeah, I think that it was full of people, good people who loved God and were trying to love people the best they could. So of course it was full of all of the shit that the churches are full of. However, I think that the charismatic side was so good for me because I would sort of go on to live this disembodied life for so long that I feel like if I had been in a more theology heavy church, it could have really created a lot more damage. But inside the charismatic church, I think, Cass, you're familiar. I don't know about you, Dave.
Dave and I both are.
Yeah, we both had this similar, yeah.
Okay, so, you guys know, it's theology light.
Yeah.
You can go as far in as you want.
It's more about the experience, the feeling and the power of God and the experience, yeah.
Yeah, and I know that can be deformative, and it certainly was for me too, but I feel like it at least was this one place that I wasn't shutting off from my senses, from my humanity, even though I know that seems far-fetched based on we know the damage it does. But does that make sense?
Yeah. Can you say more about what you mean by disembodied?
Yeah, disembodied. Well, in my letter to you, I was talking about religion meeting the unmet needs of my life. And so I'm wondering if that was the piece. This is connected to disembodiment, but is that the piece that sort of seems unique to you when you read it, or what seemed unique when you were...
that's a big part of it. I guess you were also pulling in some other quotes from other writers, but...
I'll just read it.
Go ahead. Yeah.
It says, for me, faith in God and belonging in a faith community met the unmet needs I was experiencing in my family system as a child and later as a teen. It's what made me vulnerable and then willing to surrender my self-will. We are all meeting our unmet needs, creating the God we need. He is the God of our imaginations, our deepest need. I believe that happens for most, if not all, of the sold-out radical Christians. So that's a really interesting, and you wanted to say, we are really looking to meet the most human needs in supernatural ways.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I want to expand also that when that God goes away, those needs don't.
Exactly.
There's
the big void.
This is where we find ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And you said a friend wrote you and said that nothing will ever fill that void, and you said, oh my God, that's so right.
It was an instant epiphany.
Yeah,
She's
I could
right.
see where it would be, because that thing was artificial to begin with. It was like a balloon that was blown up and then popped, and there's nothing but space there.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can't find a secular counterfeit or complement to that.
Yeah, there's nothing.
Yeah.
There's nothing.
And therein lies the void sometimes, or at least the abyss. And the loneliness of the universe is the reason that people even came up with religion, most
Absolutely.
likely. And so we're back to the loneliness of the universe. We're back to a giant dirt cloud hurling through space, and it's not very comforting.
It freaks most of us out. We realize the emptiness of life, the meaninglessness of it, how brief it is, how dark it can be, and you think, oh shit, I'd rather have something to fill that. I don't like that big empty hole. But the truth is, if we want to be honest, that's all there is.
Mm-hmm.
So how'd you cope, Shanna?
How did I cope? Well, if I can just, something you said there, Dave, when you said, oh shit, this big empty hole. I remember listening to the On Being podcast, which, Cass, I know you also love. It's a pivotal part of, I think, my deconversion. But I remember listening to a talk by Joanna Macy. So she's the translator for Rilke. And I remember she talked about this loss of God in her life in her early 20s. And she basically said, it left this giant just crater in her life for 10 years. And when I heard that, I did freak out. I thought, I can't handle that for 10 years. That is too long. I can't do that.
Yeah.
And so how did I cope? I think I've gone about trying to just intentionally create rhythms for my life that are spiritual in the way Sam Harris maybe uses spiritual. Spiritual rhythms, I guess, that ground my life into real life, coming back to this disembodiment and to embodiment. So I think the journey of my life from now on is just to live to learn inside this body.
There you go.
That's good.
Now, just to preface here, we can take this out if this isn't.
Sure.
I know we're protecting your identity to some extent. Are you willing to talk about what you do for a living?
Sure. Yeah, I can talk about what I do for a living. My husband was really hopeful I would use a pseudonym, but I said, the whole reason for going on here is to have others bear witness and to come out in the way, whatever way that's going to mean for me. And so, no, I'm going to use my name, even though I'm not using my full name. But yeah, so I'm a therapist. I'm a child trauma therapist. I've been doing that for about 13 years.
Wow.
So for sure that informs this sense of needing to live an embodied life, but also just how Christianity has impacted our development. I know lots of people talk about this, arrested development. But for me, as I was deconverting and I was doing some of the intellectual pieces of deconversion, I was also having this intellectual understanding about development, formation, and fundamental needs. So I will say, coming back to living a disembodied life at our core, right? I don't know if I wrote this to you, and please edit whatever is gibberish, but I don't know if I wrote about this, but here's where I come from and what I said to you guys. Humans have two essential needs at our core, and that is belonging or attachment and authenticity. And these two needs have to kind of compete against each other. In most systems, in all our family systems, and in most systems, it's a challenge. Even healthy systems, it's a difficult rub. Mm-hmm. But inside of a dysfunctional family or inside of a dysfunctional system like the church, you will have to choose one. But when you're young, if authenticity threatens your attachment, because we need that for surviving, right? If it threatens your connection, attachment must trump authenticity every time. Yeah. And kids will betray themselves.
Well, there you go. I mean, the need to be liked, the need to be in community, the need for that attachment. If somebody has a narrative that they've told themselves that in order for me to have that, I have to put on a persona, a mask, an identity. I have to be a people pleaser. And then you spend your whole life pursuing that connection and that attachment at the expense of your authenticity. And that's a tragic story.
And it's a long way back, isn't it? I mean, it's a long way back to your authenticity. At least it has been for me.
Oh my gosh!
I think some people never find it. I mean,
you're right.
I spent 3.5 decades in Christianity, and I'm not going to have that many decades to unpack that. So I've got, I've got to do a more work to find my true self than I have the years to equal out what I gave to religion, and so I'll unpack it the best I can and try to be as authentic as I can, but it's who knows if I'll ever get there.
And I have to say, this is really fresh. Just yesterday I had a conversation with a friend, and this notion of true self came up, and he kind of voiced some pushback against maybe the psychological emphasis on it. And he's like, dude, at the end of the day, I'm just going to be me. But in a way, by surrendering and by showing at least some, I'm all out of fucks, type apathy, he actually...
He's doing it.
He's doing it.
That's right. That is your true self.
It's very zen, right? You give up and there you find yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And even when Dave was saying that, I couldn't help but think, the way... You're right. I mean, some people don't have... You have less time ahead of you than you do behind to discover this. And so, for me, it's that much more important for us to just live into it, like in an embodied way. I feel like that is how we come back to ourselves. So that's why I said, for me, that's the journey of the rest of my life.
Have you heard of this band? I think they're called Oh Hello, or they've got a song called Wormwood or something. And it starts out, the guy saying, when I was a little boy, I didn't know you. I never heard your voice. And the only thing that scared me was the things under my bed. And then you began to teach me and train me to hide and to be insecure. And then he gets to the chorus, and the chorus says, I know who you are now. And they repeat that. And then the second verse is more about whether it's fear, if he's singing the song to fear, how it continued to drain the life out of him. But I know who you are now. Again, they get into that chorus. And the last chorus says, and I know who I am now.
When I was a child, I didn't hear a single word you said. The things I was afraid of, they were all confined beneath my bed. But the years have been long, and you have taught me well to hide away the things that I believed in. You've taught me to call them all escapes. I know who you are now. I know who you are. I know who you are now. hours have been long. You have taught me well to sit and wait, planning without acting, steadily being what I hate. I know who you are now. I know who you are. I know who you are I have always known you. You have always been there in my mind. But now I understand you, and I will not be part of your designs. I know who I am now, and all that you made of me. I know who you are now. I name you my enemy. I know who I am now. I know who I want to be. I want to be more than this devil inside of me.
So, well, you were talking about the rhythms that you look for to enhance your life, fill the void that God maybe used to fill, or just, we're meaning-making creatures, and everybody's doing the best they can. And so whether it's relationships or, I know it's trivial, but like crossword puzzles are a big deal to me. So they give value to my life.
Cass' day is not complete until he's done his puzzle. He's such a creature of habit. It's so funny.
It's like a rhythm to his day, right?
It's a rhythm.
Exactly right.
That's what we're talking about. But I know you blogged some, and one of the paragraphs in one of the blogs that you sent me, or that I got a link to, was you said this: but sometimes writing helped me slip out of my life and float above it, out of it, and play with storylines and meaning to make it look and feel the way I wanted it to. This is dangerous. Real living with both feet on the ground is messy, uncomfortable, ordinary, uncontrollable, human. This is the gift, the thrill. But I didn't know it yet. Writing about life enabled me to disconnect from what is present, real, and right in front of me. It let me take a safer bird's eye view, which didn't pierce or delight my heart nearly as much. Motherhood broke me open, and I began to learn the feeling of real life and love. I started slipping in and out of this disembodied way I had done life, but only just. Still, just enough for vulnerability and authenticity to find its way into my life and writing. Any commentary?
God, I hadn't really reviewed any of those. I hadn't reread any of that stuff in such a long time. And to hear that, I feel the weight of that when you read it to me. It's really emotional for me, actually, because my kids, giving birth, becoming a mother, I know it's what saved me, but at the time I thought it's what fundamentally was breaking me. But as most things like this in our life, right? It looks like it's the breaking, but it's actually the kind of the place for new birth. So what I would say is, I think one of the most powerful parts of becoming a mother, and I think its impact on even where I am now and deconversion, is it was my first real welcoming back to my body. I mean, when you have a baby, it is just a full human, physical, I mean, of course it's emotional and spiritual and all of those things too, but it is just, it's pure physicality too, right? Like you get what I'm saying. So I think that was my wake up call. And when I really track back, I think my kids are the holding for my deconversion. My kids are the reason that I'm where I am, both because it woke up my sense of, my body and living inside of a body, and also because I got to experience real love for really the first time, to give it and to get it,
Yeah. Well, did part of that have to do, though, and you wrote, I was also forced to question the goodness of a glory-hungry God that would so easily discard my life and be indifferent to the pain of my children without a mother. Yeah. So,
that goes back to her fear of dying.
Yeah, but did that also disconnect you, seeing that there was not that this God that you had been told loved us with such a passionate love to die for us, didn't love us even as much as we love our own kids?
Exactly.
That was what I thought you were saying.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's go back and get that piece, because when people get wrapped up in a phobia or in an anxiety that they can't shake, and everybody else around them are like, dude, you're not going to die, or whatever it is, and yet the person trapped in that thought. I mean, talk about that experience.
Yeah, so in 2011, my daughter was 1 year old, so she's my second. I went away on a women's retreat that I was hoping I would just get this kind of rest and break. I was a mom with 2 little kids, and I went away on this retreat and walked away absolutely broken, with the sense that God had told me I would die within a short time, like maybe a decade. I didn't know for sure, but there was like a sense around that for me. I guess if I back up a little bit, when I was pregnant with my daughter, I began to have a growing sense that something bad would happen. And it grew, it became a bit ominous, but because I only had this one framework, even though at this time I am a therapist, so this is a little embarrassing, but I am a therapist.
Hey, it's all embarrassing that we believed any of this shit.
Yeah.
Thank you. I know. My husband's like, are you going to talk about that there? Like, that's so crazy. But it's really where, as I wrote to you, Cass, it's really where my deconversion started. It's where my Christianity stopped giving me more than it gave me, because I began to have to ask some really...
It stopped giving you more than it gave you, or took, or what?
Gave me. Of course it did give me. Of course it took all the fundamental things, freedom and self-will, but I was willing to exchange those, because we already said, I had to choose attachment over my authenticity, over becoming myself, over, self-direction. We have to choose connection when we're young. And so I had to do that. And the problem is that, for my little self, I say, good job. That is when I'm in my right mind, I know that's what we need to do. We must choose that to survive. The problem is it becomes our pattern. So it became my pattern, and that was the pattern I also, lived with in the church. So
wait, your pattern being what? Good job?
To choose belonging over
authenticity.
And telling yourself good job?
Oh, so I think that when we look back at the places where we chose what we can now see as a
bad idea, whatever.
Psycho jargon. I'm trying to avoid that. But when we can look back and see, that wasn't actually healthy. That wasn't actually the best thing for my life. It's easy to sit now and say that, but actually I needed to survive. I was little, and so I needed to choose attachment. But I can't keep on choosing attachment over authenticity. And so, but those things become our patterns, and that's why they're so hard to find a new way in.
Well, I think that's a big reason why a lot of people who start questioning stop themselves, because they are belonging to a community and they don't want to lose that. They don't want to lose their family, their friends, all of that stuff. So when the questions get too hard, they stop and say, okay, shut this thing down.
Yeah, and for me, I think I was saying that it was a gift to me. Christianity, faith had been a gift to me, and that's because that was honestly the only place where I was convinced that I was loved, that I was accepted, that I was good enough, that I had a place, both in that church that I grew up in, that loving church that I grew up in, but then also kind of in my sense of God and his acceptance of me, which obviously now I see as, a replacement of my attachment system, which was, I should have had all those things from a mother or from my family.
And I think that gives us license or empowerment to cut people some slack when we can clearly see that they would not do well without that security blanket.
Yeah. And so, I've heard you say that before, and I love that. Yeah. You're
looking back and saying, you know what, it got me where I am today. And I think we're obviously tempted as binary thinkers to make an assessment where that was stupid or that was smart, that was good or that was bad. And then there's another place that says it just was what it was, and I can be haunted by that past and the rankings and ratings of that.
Or you just say, you know what, I was doing the best I could at the time.
Yeah.
Which is where I have to do. That's where I have to land myself, Yeah. I was given everything I could at the time. That's all I knew.
It's one of the greatest things to cut yourself some slack. That's all.
Yeah, and I, when you said that, Cass, I couldn't help but think of there's a May Sarton poem that has this line that says, live in the layers, not in the litter. And that's how I see that.
The litter as in cat litter? What is that?
Excuse me.
No, just like the litter, the shit kind of
okay, just trash,
the trash that comes from all those things that I chose.
The litter of life, yeah.
Yeah, that I did give up myself. I did betray myself, having to choose to belong.
The thing about our kind of Christianity, that evangelicalism that we were all in, is that it teaches you that narrative is built into the fabric of it. Deny yourself. Don't trust your mind. Give up. Lay down. Die to self. All that stuff. So
the heart is deceitful above all else.
Absolutely. Right? So authenticity is not even part of the equation. You're supposed to lose yourself in Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just kind of something. Religion, so I've talked about some of its gifts, but of course it taught me to live a more disembodied life. It taught me to disconnect from who I am and what I think. So just like, Dave's saying there. So though it gave me lots of gifts, it also enabled this, or encouraged, demanded maybe this disembodied life.
So let me know if I'm wrong here or way off or whatever, but when I hear disembodied, I also, especially in the context of religious trauma, the church's emphasis on sex or the shaming of sex can make you want to, Paul was wanting to cut off flesh or whatever that would cause him to sin, or pluck your eye out, Jesus said, and
mutilate yourself.
Yeah, so there's this debasement and almost disgust with our own bodies. Was that any part of your story?
Yeah, I don't think I could have consciously obviously have said that. Even at deconversion, I wouldn't have said disgust, but yes. I think that, because it disrupts every area of normal, healthy human development, for me, sexuality and my femininity were on the table. And, when I look back, all central godly characters in the Bible are kind of asexual representations of people. The people who are sensual, who have lust, it always leads them away from God, or it creates damage, right? Yeah. And so I knew as a girl, I think these were implicit messages. Also, there's the part that we're all supposed to be like Jesus, who's a fucking man.
Yeah.
And I'm a female, and so I didn't realize until I was out that how much damage that did to my sense of femininity, to sexuality, and to sensuality. I want to separate those, I think, for myself. So what I would say is that I knew as a girl I wanted God's approval, right? And I was devoted to God, but I knew unconsciously that my choice was saint or slut. I knew it.
Saint or slut?
Saint or slut. For a girl, you are a saint.
Nothing
or you
in between. Yeah.
Really, no.
Wow. Just to put myself in that for a second as a male, let's say I was raised in a country where the religious icon was female, and we day in and day out were follow me, follow Christ as I follow, just, and even singing the songs, make me like you, Lord, just make me like you. Well, if I were singing to a woman, how would that make me feel? And I've never thought about that until right now.
Yeah, it's a male-dominated culture. It's totally about
Well, and I think that it facilitates women being disconnected from their bodies. Because our bodies and our, sexuality, gender, they are a part of who we are, a critical part of who we are. So even that, I think when you it's not overt, obviously, it's implicit. But because I was devout, I was porous, I wanted it all. That was part of it. And you know what, to be honest, one of the ways that showed up is that I couldn't stand to listen to female preachers or female singers. I was always, and to be fair, I think partially I had issues. I have mother issues. So just the whole femininity, I just had issues with all around. And then Christianity came and just reinforced that. So that is one of the ways that I come back to this journey that I'm on of living connected to my whole self. And sexuality is certainly a part of that journey. Do you know who Esther Perel is?
Nope.
Oh, you should look her up, Cass. So she's a sex therapist, but she talks about this, to come back to embodiment, that this is not merely a Christian problem, obviously, but I think it's exacerbated for us there for the reasons we're talking about. But.
How do you spell Perel?
Perel. She does talk about the difficulty in monogamy when we look for, so kind of don't get turned off by her what she's most known for, which is saying the kind of sex that we want in monogamy is not the kind of sex we can get in a one-night stand. And we conflate the two, and we think that they should be able to, a stable relationship should also be able to give us this sexual thrill and risk that we are kind of wired to want. And that we're kind of doing harm by putting monogamy in such a box. She's not against monogamy. She's for long marriage and all of that, if that's what works for people. But she also talks just about this embodiment and our sexuality. And it's been powerful for me, actually.
Well, Cass and I have had several conversations about the validity of monogamy.
The myth of monogamy.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. In fact, before he was looking through my library and he was saying, do you have the book Sex at Dawn? And I don't have it in physical, I have it on audio. But just, books like that kind of reveal they were animals. They were animals.
Exactly. I think her book is called Mating in Captivity.
Cool. Well, let me speculate on something else, because as you're talking about these struggles as a woman and everything that you just listed, and then going back to what you said about childbirth being something that kind of, brought you home to your true north, your identity. I don't know, I'm just speculating, but perhaps because a human being growing inside you is completely unique to women, and it's very primal, the stuff that it's touching in your soul and psyche as that child is developing, and your hips are shifting, your cervix is going to eventually dilate, your boobs are going to eventually lactate at the sound of that baby's voice. The body is completely lining up with nature and other creatures within that nature that came out of your body. This is some amazing shit going on. And it was any of that, like the awe of that, part of what gave yourself permission to love your femininity or anything?
You know what? I would say my body knew that, but my mind did not. So yeah, that stuff was shifting for my body. And that's one of the reasons that I'm out. But my mind was far behind. I did absolutely delight in becoming a mother. When I had my son, it was the ultimate joy. But I don't think that my mind was yet able to do. My body had to go first. At that point, there was no connection in my mind yet, because my mind and body were not connected.
That's the word, disembodied.
That's the disembodiment. I lived in my head and not inside of my head, living inside of who I am. It wasn't integrated, I guess.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I'm starting to get it. I asked you about 30 minutes ago. What do you mean by disembodied?
Sorry.
And I just got it. You've been unpacking it for the whole time.
Yeah.
So one of the poems that you put, and just read a little bit of it, and there's something to this that is, most of the listeners of the show got this trauma We're trying to get over it. We're trying to find how to land, from this. How now shall we live? Where's up and down, north, south, east, and west? So this is a releasing. It's a poem called Releasing, I think. May you bless the place you live and bless the spot you fell. May we finally hear all the perfect lies that kept us here and the skills we learned just to keep us whole. Be thanked for what they were and finally let go.
All the perfect lies that kept us here. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
That's how I see my life in the church.
Yeah.
That I was only good enough, that I could only be loved if I betrayed myself.
Yeah. So,
hey, can I say something about what you just said before you read that? By the way, that's a song, and it's really much better in song form. It's a song by Carrie Newcomer. But
okay.
You mentioned how we're all on this journey and we have this trauma, and we're trying to find a way forward. How now shall we live? And I was thinking that I think that this is what my story is teaching me, is that we try to do this intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly it is a part, obviously, it's a part of the journey, because if we're integrated, our mind needs to come along. But we leave our bodies behind.
Mm.
Or maybe we left them behind so long ago in Christianity that they're not even anywhere near us. You know what? This is just coming to me. I totally had forgotten about this. But long before I deconverted, I remember sitting in this park, and I was just kind of having this sort of like transcendent moment with myself, this God moment that I would have said at the time.
Sure.
I just had this sense that I had like left myself back. I had disconnected somewhere back there, and that I needed to come back to myself. So I think we try to do this intellectually, but our bodies we're not doing this inside of our bodies. Does that make sense?
Well, I remember as a fundamentalist Christian, as an evangelical, the body is it's almost denigrated. It's looked at as, it's really going to hold you back. It's really not going to help you, get closer to God. And the mind is, you can't trust the mind. You can't trust the heart. It's all about the spirit. It's all about that spiritual connection.
Spirit,
and so,
yes.
And so, coming out of that world, you don't know what to do with your body. You don't know what to do with your mind. You certainly don't know how to integrate all three.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a part of me that doesn't understand what you're talking about. And maybe that is indicative of something, right? I mean, because oh my God, this could be epiphanal for me, because my wife is very concerned that I don't take good enough care of my body. And I just kind of look at this body, and this is, even as I'm about to say this is a very Christian-sounding statement that I'm about to say.
As a vessel, it's
just the truck that's carrying me around.
That's how we were taught. Yeah, it's the vehicle to get you to God and to get you to eternity and all those things. It's meaningless, and
it's going to rot and be eaten by worms. So maybe there's a place for me, on a healthier place, for me to invite my body back into my life as a valuable asset.
And I think to say to your body, I will listen to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've gotten pretty good at
what you need.
I've gotten pretty good at listening, but
the doing.
Yeah, or what I do to it, because I'm a smoker.
But isn't that more like a fuck you to the rules from before?
It very much was, and it's a stress thing. I didn't start smoking until I started deconverting. Yeah, and it was a fuck you though.
One thing I've learned coming out of all that stuff is that I have an appreciation for everything else more than I ever did before, because I minimized everything in this life, everything in this world, everything anywhere other than God and spirit and eternal things. It was all about eternal things, because everything else is temporal, right? Our body's temporal, this world is temporal, and we have to focus on it. I was looking at what you wrote. Life is amazing and beautiful, a precious wild gift, but it is unpredictable and uncertain, and sometimes that is so freaking terrifying. Christian dogma built so much scaffolding around the mysteries of life that it was impossible to see its beauty. That is an incredible line that you wrote.
Go on. There's somewhere
but for myself, I've come to realize I might need something, nothing like the layers and layers of scaffolding. But what you were talking about in that whole long paragraph there was, I think, instructive for me, and I've learned this about myself. I have so much more appreciation for a single day, the life that is here, that the beauty of life, that I'm awed by it. I get moved to tears by it.
That you're breathing in and out.
Yes, how rare and beautiful it is that we even exist, this song I love. And just, that wasn't the case before. I looked at it as just a pathway to eternity, and that, it didn't really matter. Even stuff like taking care of our planet, I wasn't even cognitive of that before. I didn't care. It was eternity I cared about. And you're right, Christian dogma builds scaffolding, and we lose the beauty of life.
And when there's cracks in the scaffolding, the beauty shone through, and she was starting. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's just it, Cass. There's some cracks in my life. It's so interesting. I've heard a couple others say this on your podcast, and I can't agree more that, Christians say, oh, isn't it sad? They had that suffering experience, and that's what led them out. And we used to resist that. But now I say, absolutely. I connected to my humanity with those cracks and to real life.
You're talking about experiencing negative things or suffering. Yeah.
Right. They usually, but the cracks for me in my life come in my experiential living, like in real living. I wanted to go back to what Cass was saying about the embodiment, like I think in his head, knowing what I'm saying, but just it's a disconnect there. Right before you said that, I was thinking and going to add that, the church does this, as Dave described so well, that they encourage us to not trust our bodies, our minds, all of that, only the spirit. But you add in some trauma, like add in trauma beyond spiritual trauma, religious trauma, and then we've got a real mess. Me too. So the body is not a safe place. So it makes sense that we do not trust our bodies. And so even when we deconvert, it's not automatic that our bodies become a place that is safe, that is we can be nurtured by, because we have this other layer, So, and for me, I think my trauma goes, I think back, so we have memories, this. So our memories are implicit and explicit, and our implicit memories are the things our body knows, but we don't have concrete memory for. And so touch and places of harm or delight in touch are stored just literally in our cells.
This is making me think of what Brian Maynard has studied in his therapy. Have you heard? Have you heard of this?
Is he out? Can we say
I don't know his work
you may
well,
have to edit that out. No, he's a friend of ours here, and it's about the body. The body doesn't lie, or something like that. There's a book.
Oh, yeah, it's a big emphasis on the body. Yeah.
Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that book, but similar. There's Bessel van der Kolk is sort of the lead, and he has a book called The Body Keeps the Score. So probably similar.
That's something in that, and the trauma is stored in the body.
Say his name slowly.
Yeah, it's seriously, Cass, it's amazing. Bessel van der Kolk, Kolk.
Bessel van der Kolk. Okay.
Yeah, and he's sort of the leading trauma researcher.
The body keeps the score.
The body keeps the score.
I think that's what Brian is referred to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So let me go back and maybe tap the relationship with your family. Do they know you're not a believer anymore? How's that going?
Okay, so my family. So I don't live in the States anymore, as I said, but they are Bible Belters. So no, I am not out, I guess is the short answer to that. But I have tried to slowly kind of. I know they've seen a shift in my social media and in the language that I use. So, and I think it scares them. And they are just too afraid to ask.
How many siblings you got?
I have a younger sister, and then I had an older brother who died when I was 21.
Wow, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, he, and to come back to that, I think that's another place. The grief, the loss of, it was a sudden death, and so there was this little ping on my self of real life with that too. So, I have an older brother, younger sister, and
you get along with her?
That's a weighty question. I used to, but it's really interesting. Our paths are just so diverging. So she is, what's the phrase? She's doubling down. on all her doubts and her faith, and I have gone the other way. And so she's hard for me to connect to.
Does she know you're not a believer?
No.
Okay.
No. So the people in my daily life, no.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I live thousands of miles away, so it works.
So
the people in my daily life, no.
How revealing would it be for us to say you now live in Canada and you were raised in where?
I was raised in Kansas City.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'm not in hiding. It's this very strange thought. Like, I'm not in hiding. You know what I feel like with my family, and maybe I'm in denial and hiding from it and not really aware of it, but I have this sense of, if they'll have the courage to ask me, I'll have the courage to answer.
Yeah.
But I really put my needs for my whole life with them behind, and I did what they needed and what they wanted. And so I feel like this is my way of saying, you know what, if you ask me, I will tell you, but I don't need to come to you with that. That might change.
Yeah.
I have kids, and so this becomes a little bit dicier.
Yeah.
About how we handle this kind of going forward. Again, the distance helps. So.
And your husband, was he ever a believer? Did he have any post-religious trauma?
So my husband was a Christian for sure when I met him. One of the biggest issues in our marriage when I was a Christian is that I thought he was just too lukewarm. So this is a saving grace. I know that feeling. Marriage. Do you?
Oh.
Did you? Is that your experience?
Oh, everyone was lukewarm compared to me.
Right. Well, yes. Okay. Of course. Of course. I'm glad. I totally relate to that.
Yeah.
Big S on your shirt.
Yeah. And my husband used to say to me, like, I'm trying so hard to connect to this God that you know. And I don't know what is wrong with me that I can't. And now I look back and I feel so sad for that shame that he felt, because really it was what was wrong with me that I could.
One of the great dangers of, here you are kind of modeling this, you have this intimate relationship with God. He speaks to you. And then he says, I'm going to take your life this year.
Oh my God.
And when you're subject to voices in one's head, I mean, you're a sitting duck for the monkey brain to really fuck you up.
For any thought to lodge there and become God's voice. Yeah. That's scary.
Totally.
So he was envying something not worthy of envying.
No. To go to that, I'll say, that experience of thinking God had sort of spoken over my life in this way, it was the beginning for me, because I was forced to look outside of evangelicalism for a place where I could wrestle with those deep questions and that suffering. I mean, I believed it was literal, and that's part of the problem, again, with literal Christianity. The literal belief in what the Bible says is because everything I thought I heard had to be literal. I remember my spiritual director saying, could it be a metaphor? No, I said, no, it's literal. So that experience, I had to move outside of fundamentalism, and that's where things just began to kind of start shifting for me.
Today was supposed to be the last day of the world from some Christian's perspective, wrote a book on it or whatever. And in a sense, you got a word of knowledge that you were going to die. And was there a time frame on it, like about in a year or within the year?
Here's what's funny. I knew it was imminent. And so I got down on the ground. I was laying in deer poop. So this is very embodied. I was laying on the ground. I remember, I realized I was in deer poop, and I just began to plead with God to give me more time.
Yeah.
How old were you then?
See, my daughter, I think I was 29, 2000? I was 30.
Okay.
So time goes by. You wake up day in and day out, find yourself still alive. I mean, what happens to the thought?
No, it doesn't go. What happens is I begin to, because this is part of who I am, my nature. I'm a contemplative by nature. And so I'm a wrestler. I always loved that story of Jacob.
Yep,
I will not let you go till you bless me. And so I'm a wrestler. So I just began to wrestle this out. I found a spiritual director who could handle this.
What is that? What is a spiritual director?
It's a mentor.
Yeah. And you know what? I am so thankful for her. I know when I think about the things I'm grateful for on my way out, she is one,
Was she a Christian?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, she still is. Yep, still is.
I've never heard that phrase, that term.
So then that you were very fundamentalist, right?
That was as close to a Bob moment as you're going to have this.
What? I got to play the Bob part here. Wait a minute. What is a spiritual director? I don't know. What is that?
It's It's like counseling, but it's all focused on your life with God.
Yeah.
So it's really beautiful
if
you're living in that world. Can be quite beautiful, and she was a gift to my life and still is. But so I began wrestling, and so it wasn't just kind of living with it day in and day out. I still believed it. But what began to happen for me, well, actually a couple of things happened. One, I started listening to On Being because I was just looking for these lifelines of like nourishment and ways to connect to my real life. Because see, that's what happened for me is this thing that I loved, this real life that I was kind of living and floating above. I desperately wanted it when I realized God was going to take it from me. So I started listening to On Being, and then I realized, hey, there are a lot of other people with different faiths that live beautiful lives, that live better lives than a lot of Christians I know. And so then I had to really begin wrestling with questions. So the doctrinal stuff kind of started coming in for me there of, if I had been born a Jew, I just realized due to my nature, I would have been a good Jew. If I'd been born a Muslim, I would have been, like whatever my culture and my language and the ideology of where I'd been born, I would have just run to that, run to God. And also because I had this brokenness from my childhood, I was susceptible. So I was wrestling out some of that stuff, the doctrinal stuff, and then hell. But then, so it was just, I think the piece that you spoke to, Cass, that I wrote about is what kind of God would... So my spiritual director had said, she challenged me on it. So I had said, I think that this prophecy is God's gift to me. That I can be living my life full-heartedly until the end. Almost
like your own personal Abraham and Isaac.
Okay, so, I'm glad you said that. But I feel utterly resistant. But that's exactly what some Christian friends told me.
Okay, that you were the Isaac and the Abraham?
No, that I was the Abraham and my children were the Isaac. And so this is what began to rattle.
No.
It's sick.
That's weird.
It's sick. So, well, actually, my friend, the friend who really journeyed with me, she, Jesus Calling, I just hate that thing.
Yeah.
Okay. I just hate it. Even when I was a Christian, I hated it. So, but she loved it. And so she came to me with a Jesus Calling devotional or whatever. And she said, I think this is for you. And it was basically how I had loved my children more than God.
Yeah. They were your idol.
And so, my kids had been my idol, and so this was God calling me back to himself and asking me to lay my children on the idol. And I remember when I was so angry, I could have thrown something at her. I was...
Good.
Right? Because the love that I really was experiencing, the real life thing, pushed against it, and I'm so thankful for that.
Now, where I was going with the Abraham Isaac thing was, as a spiritual discipline, God has told you that I'm going to take your life in prematurely, I guess you could just say open-ended. But by framing it as a gift, just the only thing I could think of when I heard you say that was, I am going to show how much I love God, even though he's put a gun to my head. Or,
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm going to glorify God. So my question that I journeyed into was, how do I live a whole life to the end? Because it was making it very hard. I was full of grief. I was full of pain.
Anxiety.
And I would look at my kids and I would just collapse because I know how much losing a parent at a young age is traumatic.
Did you?
And so I thought, I did not, but as a therapist, I knew that it's a huge impact. And I thought, here I am, this loving mother trying to give my kids something I never got, and now my kids are going to end up with this kind of a trauma. And so what kind of God, would be okay with that? I could get over God taking my life because, we don't value our lives, as Dave was already saying. We're taught not to do that. Yeah, I don't think fully value my own life. But when it came to my kids, it was a fierce resistance in me to that.
Well, this is where Bob would say, oh my gosh, the suffering that you Christians pile on your life. Life's already hard enough. This was much ado about nothing in hindsight, obviously.
Oh my God, yes.
But it was the beginning of the end for you, apparently. It began to cause you to question things that you thought were certain before.
Yeah, God's goodness. God God cared about me. I would remember, what faith and the church were doing for me were saying, you are loved, you are taken care of, you belong here. And so I thought I had that in God. And then to realize, you will put me up on the altar of your glory, I'm going to have to rethink this deal I've made here. It was really painful, obviously, but it was, what's really, just to think about metaphor and not to like trigger anybody because it sounds a little religious, but I did die there. I did die in that. And, metaphorically speaking, my faith died.
Well, and that child who listened to voices in her head, died.
She did. She died.
She doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And good.
And how long ago was that now? That
was in 2011 when that began.
Okay.
But there's another piece of that, which is I was diagnosed. So a year after that craziness, I became very ill, and they thought I had a brain tumor, and then they thought I had MS. And so it was this long journey of going through testing, and in the end, I was diagnosed with Lyme disease. However, for me, there's this question mark around that. What the power of the brain to harm the body, like our beliefs about ourselves, because MS or Lyme even is the body turning on itself. Mm-hmm. Not that it's not a real disease, of course it is, and there's real bacteria happening there, but there's a reason that the body can no longer fight those bacteria, because lots of us have some of those bacteria in our body, and our immune systems just fight it. But mine didn't do that, and it let it turn on itself. Mm. But one of the other pivotal pieces of that for me was with Lyme. Interestingly, it didn't confirm the entheos prophecy for me. It didn't make it for sure in my mind, because I think my real life was still battling against the shit, the BS of the voices in my head. But what it did do was I kept getting worse and worse. At one point, I couldn't function. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't use my arms at times. It was scary.
Yeah.
But what it did, because avoiding death is kind of the whole deal with Christianity. That's the game. That's the end game.
Yeah.
And so what it did for me as I journeyed into it was I realized that death is part of nature, that death can nourish a life. The death sucks, that it's hard, and when you love, it's the cost of loving people, and it's painful, and I know that well, I lost my brother, but I realized that the thing I'd been told about death was that it came out of the fall. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I realized, no, it's actually a natural part of the world. It's part of the cycle of life. And so I realized that also, I guess that's where I let go of the afterlife, that there would be nothing more. And also that the church had been selling this bullshit for forever. But that it was actually life-giving. It's okay. It's actually like death. Facing your death can produce life.
It's liberating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So how long have you been married to your husband?
We've been married 14 years.
You guys, what do you guys do for fun?
Well, we have 2 kids. So I have to sadly say I don't know if we do.
Your life's dominated by them, yeah.
That's sad. I mean, really, it should be.
It's reality.
She's sitting there thinking, fun. Let's see, what's fun? What is fun?
But you know what I think our fun is? Our fun, at this stage of life, maybe you guys can identify with it. It's challenging for our marriage, but our fun is that we take time for ourselves.
Yeah.
So the other person kind of takes over the parenting while my husband loves to go fishing and hunting and sports and stuff like that, and then we trade off. So I can't say we do a ton of fun together. Like we play tennis together. What do I do for fun?
For you?
I love to hike, to go hiking, being in nature. I do like to play tennis. And my nature is I love to have deep conversations with my friends about, so a coffee and a real conversation about things beyond the surface.
In regard to that, do you have people in your life locally who are atheist, agnostic, that relate to you on your level? Maybe ex-Christian even?
Yeah, I do. I have one friend that I really deconverted alongside.
I see.
And then another, my best friend, had kind of, in my opinion, before fallen away, and so when I began to have, I unraveled much faster and further than her, but she had slowly been making those steps. And I'll tell you something, I don't know if you guys have had this feeling, but I remember just wrestling some of my ideas over lunch with her, and it was kind of blowing her mind a little. Mm-hmm. And I felt afraid. I thought, I don't want to make you deconvert. I don't want to be the reason that you can't believe what you love to believe.
Yeah. Well, you probably started feeling immediately the responsibility of that, because that could really fuck her up, and you're like, I don't want to be that guy or girl.
Yeah. I still feel that. Yeah,
for sure. Well, you quoted, I think, a blogger by the name of Libby Ann. Mm-hmm. And, you just used 2 or 3 metaphors or descriptors of losing one's faith. And you related to it and you shared it, and I ended up looking her up. I've invited her on the show. She hasn't responded yet.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But you
turned me on. I don't even know who she is. I didn't
either, but she comes from Quiverful movement. Yeah. So she's real critical of that. But so if either of you, Dave, do you have it or do you have it memorized, Shanna, that quote?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Don't say I lost my faith because I dug it out of my bones with chisels and knives.
Oh, that's good.
I don't say I lost my faith because I chiseled it out of where?
Of my bones.
Of my bones.
Of my bones. And I think it's like, don't say, not I don't say.
Oh, okay.
Like, it's imperative, right? Like it's pissed. It's like, don't say I lost my faith. I dug it out of my bones with chisels and knives.
Oh, man, I love that first time I heard it.
In your process of, all of us can relate to this because we talk about this a lot around here. We've got quite a community of us here, our little church. But was there a moment that you can recall when you realized, oh, shit, it's gone? I mean, you talked about the beginning of that deconversion, but what was the Jenga pin that pulled it out and the whole thing, it just tumbled? Was there a moment you can recall?
There's 2. Okay. And I will just say one, I think that pin that pulled it all out, when I began to realize that these kids that I was mothering well were not very desperate for God.
Yeah.
Do you hear me? Do you know what I mean? Do you guys have this experience? Okay.
Yeah. So they didn't have a God-shaped hole they were trying to fill.
Yeah, they didn't, and so this really challenged me. I thought, what? This is not working, right? My kids should be growing up more whole than I did, and they should be able to love God more, not less. And then my professional life was saying, if attachment, the attachment system, which I understood, was God's perfect order, that's how I saw it, and it wasn't producing what it should, which is like desperate for God kids. Do you need trauma to be desperate for God?
Ooh, yeah, I think you do.
Yeah. I think you do.
It preys on the needy. The needier you are, the more vulnerable you are to God.
And that's where I probably still get angry, that is the case for people. So I had to turn that question on myself, and I had to say, would I be less desperate for God if my needs had been met inside of a real human family system? And the answer to that was, yeah, I probably would be less desperate. My son is a beautiful leader on my deconvert. He's only 9. But he would say things like, both my kids would say, Mom, I'm sorry, I love you more than I love God. And that would scare me. I would think, no, this isn't how it's supposed to work. And I would tell them how much God loved them, and that's why I was their mom, because God was showing them his love. And I really hit it home. I named my kids names that mean beloved. And then these very religious, just not religious, but just these names of deep faith. And I always told them what that meant. And we lived it out. There was no kind of incongruency, but my kids were being loved. And so they did not have the hole. So that was a huge part of that for me.
It's very interesting.
And then the moment, I guess, so I had been obviously just tearing down the scaffolding, piece by piece. I picture like a huge layers and layers of scaffolding around the beautiful reality of life that the church does. And some churches do less. I think here in Canada, there is less for a lot of people. And so I can tolerate that. And even, more progressive Christians, I can tolerate it because I see that the scaffolding is helping them get something from life. And anyway, but for me, I had been taking it piece by piece. So this is my moment. Again, I guess embodied. So I'm walking out of Safeway. I'm pushing my cart. And I just realize it's gone. And I say out loud, love will have to be enough to hold me for now. If God is love, then that will have to be enough to hold me because I've got nothing left. I don't believe any of that structure anymore. So that was my moment. And I actually, in that moment, I felt like if I'd been holding, like, I don't know, a sandcastle in my hand, a wind would have just come up and just blew it to particle.
Yeah.
Love that. Oh. And love will have to be enough. That brought tears to my eyes. I love that. Just, I don't have this thing that I had and it's gone. And I felt that very much. That was a grieving for me that this thing's gone and I don't have anything in its place and I don't know what to do. And I didn't know anyone. I had no connections like we have now that anyone that I knew had been through this. It was terrifying. And love will have to be enough. That's beautiful.
And love still is enough.
It is enough. Absolutely it is. That's all there is.
That's all there is. And that's my layer. That's my
all there is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will say, and because I had listened to your podcast before I had deconverted,
mm-hmm.
I sort of knew what to anticipate when it came to loss,
mm-hmm.
Because Dave spoke about the losses there and I identity and I did write recently to Cass that, when I say this, I want to be mindful that, Dave, I have not lost anything nearly as precious as you have, and many others in their deconversion. And so I say this with understanding that that's not my life and my experience, but I knew there would be like identity loss, community loss. But you know what? When I was sick with Lyme, I had kind of already lost my community. The church failed me there. And so that embodied, like, again, that connected real life physical experience of having them abandon me because I couldn't work for them anymore helped me start piecing out this belief I had that I belonged there unconditionally. And I realized, oh my God, this is just like my family system. I only belong here when I work for you.
Mm-hmm. When you have usefulness.
Right, if I'm useful to you. And then if this isn't unconditional love like I thought. So then I started, anyway, I didn't lose my church community. I still miss community in that way, obviously. And as Cass said, nobody duplicates that. Like the church just has the...
We're coming close here.
I'm jealous. Yeah, when you guys
we really have an amazing community.
No,
it's amazing.
It is great, but you're never going to have that weekly meeting where people's monies are collected and you have people organizing the calendar. I mean, you're right. It's never going to be.
We could start collecting money. That wouldn't be a hard thing.
Yeah.
You might have a bunch of people get up and leave, have a trauma response to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't go to church. I will say I tried as I was sliding out. I tried Quaker community because you can be an atheist and be a Quaker and you still have community. But in the end, I just realized I was just still desperate to belong somewhere and I needed to belong to myself first. And so I let that go and I don't go to church. And we do have a UU church here and I've thought about it. I think I still do have a little bit of trigger when it comes to church things. Or my friend bought me a humanist Bible, and I just thought, burn that thing. Like I had a reaction to it. You know what I was blindsided by was I lost my gentleness. I had this gentleness about me that people loved about me. I mean, it was one of the ways I made up for the fact that I didn't think I was good enough. Right? I just made myself so kind and gentle and loving. So I lost this gentle quality to how I spoke to people and how I thought, because it was just this fierce, I had to put these like sharp edges around my tender self. Like, I belong to myself, not you. I belong to no one else. Do not want anything from me. Do not need anything from me. I belong to myself,
I think
period.
That's probably because you thought maybe that you'd been used by God and religion and everybody else, and you came out of that and you said, fuck that, nobody's going to use me again.
Yeah.
And there's elasticity there. I mean, you're going to stretch back to normal, or at least.
Well, I'm feeling a tiny bit of that, so that's a relief, because I did like that part of myself that could be like gentle. But
you wondered then how authentic that actually was. Was that really you?
Well, I wondered because I lost it for like a good year and a half. So I feel like now I'm getting a bit back, but it lives right beside this fierce feminism that I have. So I feel like there may be a good combo.
Sure.
But I think that authentic self of mine that I betrayed to belong needed some sharp edges around it.
That's what I'm saying. That you thought okay, I'm going to push back against this thing.
Well, here again, when it comes to your body and listening to your body, I think of these rites of passages that our bodies give us. In the case of like male puberty, is the voice is changing and it goes, and there's a season where it's just whack. and then it levels off to its new voice. And I think you went from gentle to bitchy, and then now the elasticity is working its way back to what is the true Shanna on the spectrum of bitchy and gentle.
Exactly.
And it'll level off, and it is what it is, and you can say yes to it.
Well, my husband would rather I probably said yes to it a little less frequently, but yes.
Oh, dude, I totally relate. My wife is in menopause right now, and she's basically and empty nest. So she's giving her life to these kids and life to everybody else, and she's like, "Fuck all y'all! I am woman. Hear me roar." So yeah, I totally get it.
Her.
Yeah,
but on the other end of that, it's kind of like, okay, could you a little bit of that old self would be nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there was that. There was two other losses, and one is, I think, what everyone, or maybe not, but I think a lot can identify with, which is that the loss of comfort in prayer. Like, I really do miss
totally
being able to say, like, I'm not going to worry about that anymore. I'm going to leave that to God. He's working behind the scenes for me. So there's that. And then, the other one that's been harder, that I think maybe had me holding on longer than I otherwise would have, was that the loss of faith meant letting go of the meaning and the comfort that I'd found in my brother's death.
Yeah.
I still love the story that I told myself then, that he's free now. He's not battling any demons, that he's held in the arms of love, and that all of that suffering is redeemed now, and he gets to live free. I still love that story, even though it's not true.
It got you through it.
Yeah, so I think that's probably the hardest to let go of. And even thinking about my relationship with my sister, she lost a baby a couple years ago, and I think that this will be a real point of just pain between us when she knows I no longer believe she'll hold her daughter again.
Yeah.
My brother lost a daughter. My brother's an evangelical pastor, and he lost a daughter at age 23. And then I also, one of the last pastors I worked with before I totally left faith, lost a son in an accident. So every time I've seen that, I've seen them double down and dig deeper and say, okay, I've got to cling to this narrative now. If I let go of this, I got nothing.
Maybe even lose their sanity. I mean, it's pretty, it's like a bullet that lodges in somebody's spine, and if the doctors go in and take it out, it's actually going to be worse. You just got to leave it there.
So what do you think the difference is? Because I feel all of those things that you just said, and then I think for myself, it was my suffering that broke all of that doubling down. So what is the difference for people, and when do you know to back off?
Go.
You know what I mean?
The guts.
It does.
The courage.
It takes courage to admit.
Persist.
And then on the other side of the courage, to get up off your ass and put one foot in front of the other and live without, that comforting narrative. And this is where Bob would say, you got to put on your big boy pants.
I think they whenever they encounter a trauma like that, they have to go one way or the other really hard. You're going to either unravel pretty quick and hard, or you're going to dig down deeper and cling even more fiercely.
Yeah, you're either going to hate God or love God.
Yeah, more. It's going to go one or the other direction. And I don't know why it goes some directions with some. I don't know why I ask the questions that others don't ask. I don't know why. I just did.
And neither. I think I'm wired that way.
Yeah, and maybe that some are just wired that way.
Shanna the wrestler.
Yeah.
I used to love that story, too. I always tell people I walk with a limp. That was my...
I did, too.
Totally.
We're three peas in a pod.
Oh, they are.
Oh, God.
Oh, God, I know.
It's been fun to talk to you, Shanna, and I really appreciate you reaching out. And you got anything you want to wrap it up with?
The only thing, I've heard you say it, Cass, and I've heard, say, Bart Campolo say it, as I've held the possibility of having a conversation with my parents and my sister, to kind of be able to pay attention to what I am grateful for. So I think just in everything I've shared here, I am grateful that my unmet needs got met in the church. Mm-hmm. Because I think I wouldn't be who I am today. I had a lot more to cut out and unlearn, and it brought a lot of pain, but I needed that. We all need that somewhere. And so I did get it there with loving people. And I think that, because I know, some stories that you grow up in a church where it really diminishes a person, and that wasn't the case for me. So I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that I grew up in a family and in a church that valued women. I didn't know about complementarian bullshit till I was like 20. So I think that helped me form a little bit more whole, a little bit. And I'm grateful for my deconversion and how it's impacted my marriage, because it's allowed us to make room for each other and who we're becoming as human beings. And so that's definitely been a big impact on, deconversion's been a big impact on our marriage, for good and for bad, because now I'm not constrained to stay, or he's not constrained to stay. But that's been the beauty, because we keep choosing it. We don't have to anymore, and we keep choosing each other.
That's the best thing. Absolutely.
Right? It's real love.
Yeah, non-obligatory.
Right.
So there's no resentment.
Yeah, exactly. There's no resentment, and it's just very, very honest between us, and I'm really thankful for that. And I think lastly, I sometimes wonder if I hadn't moved to Canada in my rebellion against God to be a missionary. I sort of moved here as I will not become a missionary, I've decided. And it's what set up my life in such a way that I think made my deconversion possible. I don't know, because I really respect you guys who are living inside the Bible Belt, who are able to even first deconvert and then to kind of hold that in a, beautiful or life-enhancing way, because I think that's a battle every day. And so I'm thankful for that. I live here. It's cultural Christian. The evangelicals are seen as a little bit wacky. And so I think that made room for me to be able to deconvert more honestly. And maybe earlier, because I deconverted 2 years ago and I'm 36. So,
Well, good for you. I'm glad you got out.
So, do you and your husband have any vices, or drink or opiates of any kind?
I love that you put drinking as a vice. It makes me feel. My mom just shared a thing on Facebook yesterday about how we should all be abstaining, and it's a vice. But yes, we drink. I don't do drugs, but marijuana is becoming legal here next year. So
the whole country?
In Alberta.
Oh.
So I'm not. I think it might already be legal in British Columbia. I'm not positive on that.
What's your drink of choice? Cass's is gin and mine's bourbon.
Yours is bourbon. Okay, so I'm kind of like a wussy, fruity, cocktaily drink. I do love. I love a Bellini. If I was choosing my favorite drink, I am gluten free from Lyme, so I do not drink anything with wheat.
Aye.
So no beer or whatever. I don't even like beer, but yeah, I'm more like a fruity cocktail.
Bellini?
Drinker. Yeah, Bellini. If you've never had one, not a real one. If you go to Italy, I went to Italy and I was totally disappointed. But if you get the slushy one, oh, so yum.
Now, is this at a liquor store, or is just at a bar you ask for a Bellini?
Oh, at a bar, yeah.
Oh, it's a drink. Okay.
Yeah. Or a Mai Tai, I guess, if I was going. I like. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. It was great.
Okay.
You've been brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you. What a fun conversation.
So Shanna from Canada.
I didn't get the story of why she moved to Canada or when.
We didn't. Yeah, there's a lot. Actually, I'm looking back at my notes. And
there's a lot
we didn't get to.
But we could have talked another hour on that stuff.
Yeah, it was. I loved it. I thought she was great.
She's brilliant. Yeah. She's got a quick mind. She really puts things. Her perspective on things is clear and sometimes refreshing. It's another angle that maybe you don't think about. So I loved it. This
term, I think the theme almost of this show is disembodiment. I mean, as far as So one thing about that word, I think about this phrase when you're thinking of somebody and you say, "Well, the lights are on, but no one's home." And a lot of times that can mean like you think they're stupid. But think about somebody who really just doesn't have any agency. Like the lights are on, but no one's home, meaning they're tossed around, kind of like what Paul said, to and fro like a reed swayed by the wind. They do what everybody else wants them to do. They kind of go with the crowd. They're, groupthink, they're herd mentality. And again, I always go back to agency. But so in some ways, when I hear, disembodied versus embodiment, like coming back into herself, integration, then that's getting agency, that which you didn't have when you were a Christian, because you disattached from your body. You'd actually just kind of disattached from yourself, because it's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me.
Well, in that whole Christian narrative, spirit, soul, and body, how many times have we taught on that? I mean, I've done classes on that whole thing.
Yeah.
Spirit, soul, and body, which is the soul was the mind, the emotions, the core of who you are. Your spirit is that which lives eternally, and your body is just this shell that just it's to carry it around, and you're going to shed it like a cocoon one day, and it's irrelevant. It's not a big part of the story.
Yeah.
So disembodiment makes me think of the way that Christianity tended to separate those parts of us and not make us whole people. We were fragmented, and everything was denigrated in terms of temporal value, and the only thing that had value was eternity.
Yeah.
And that's just a horrible way to live life. It devalues life.
Yeah.
And that's what I've always seen since I've come out of that. Life is much more precious
And it's right here, happening right here
as a
now.
humanist than it ever was as a Christian.
Yeah, it's not waiting for you in the afterlife.
It's now.
It's happening.
It is always now. God,
You're gonna miss the show if you're. It's right here.
it's here.
The
That's
tape's
right.
rolling.
It's right. This is
Action.
This is not a preview.
I thought of when Shanna was talking about how she gave her children biblical names, or at least names that had meaning, and you and I were looking at each other. You have 3 kids, I have 4, and they're all biblical names.
No, we didn't do that, but you
Oh,
did.
I
I
did.
was going to bust you on that, and I thought, no, I don't really. We did Dylan and Ferris and
Bethany.
Bethany was kind of a biblical name. but
See, because I have a daughter named Bethany.
you got
and-
Bethany and Rachel and John and
Yeah. So Bethany is a town in the New Testament that,
Yeah.
that Jesus lived. Or
Now I got Ferris off of a map and a map of Texas, and
Ferris, Texas.
yeah, and Dylan was I liked Bob Dylan, and so yeah, and we didn't. I never was kind of that way.
Okay, so just real quick, Eli John Paul. I've already packed his name on one show. And then there's Carice.
Yeah, charismatic.
Bethany Carice. And Carice is the favor of the Lord when the angel appeared to Mary.
You were much more spiritual than I was.
So Lydia Noel. Lydia was born on Christmas Eve.
God.
And Lydia is the dealer of purple cloth. And then Rachel Christine. Christine's another word for Christ. And of course, Rachel is a biblical name.
You must
So, yeah.
have gotten all these in dreams and visions.
God spoke to me,
Yeah,
Dave.
he did. Well, I used to think he spoke to me, but that was just, like Shanna learned, that was just voices in my head.
Yeah. Were you ever, we call this the God card back then, but you'd be in churches where the board of elders or whatever, and they'd be trying to make a decision, and somebody would have a word of knowledge.
Oh, yeah.
And it would trump out all the other rational goings on the table.
Well, God told me, how do you argue with that? You don't. That's the end of the story.
Well, until another guy with a bigger cock.
I can't use the word Trump anymore, by the way. When you say that,
Yeah.
Trump said, I can't use that word.
Bigger ego comes along and says, no, well, I heard God and he said this. And then we're measuring dicks in our,
Well, I heard an audible voice, and that was the Trump card of all Trump cards.
So it's
Oh, my.
wacky times, and glad to be free of it.
God, yes. And it's always good to hear another person, I just love it when we hear these folks that are walking down the same road that we walk down, and you realize you're talking to them, and you realize, my God, that's a sharp person. That's a brilliant, intelligent person. That's not an idiot. That's not some dunce that doesn't know what's going on. That's somebody who's got it going on, and they've come to the same conclusion.
Yeah, and when they describe how they got there, it's really, really helpful for the rest of us.
Absolutely.
It kind of lays out a map of sorts, and say, oh, I haven't tried that. And you get ideas from each other.
Yeah, and every story's different. They all have similar patterns to them, but everyone's got a different take on it, a little different slant.
She was cool.
Yeah, she was great.
Well, thanks for doing the show with me, man.
I enjoyed it. Thanks for letting me pop in.
May you bless the place you live, and bless the spot you fell, and let go of hidden stories too dangerous to tell. Let there be no stones to throw, and someone to watch your back, and some prayers we never answered for the things we think we lack. May we be released, may we be held dear, may we listen to the wisdom that we didn't want to hear. May we be released, may we. shout unfair. May we finally stop and think of the blame that we both share. When you stand in gale force winds and hold a passing thought, when the truth catches your eye, may you have the grace to stop. May we be released, may we be held dear, may we listen to the wisdom that we didn't want to hear. May we be released, may we. May you get fed up and finish old obsessions past their prime. May you find the silent center and leave all undone behind. And may there be bread and honey. May somebody love your flaws. Give a stranger your umbrella and love a grateful dog. May we be released, may we be held dear, may we listen to the wisdom that we didn't want to hear. May we be released, may we. And may we finally see, may we finally hear all the perfect lies that kept us here, and all the skills we learned just to keep us whole. Be thanked for what they were and finally let go. May the unseen world be present, invoked into your life. May you have the strength to question all the things you thought were right. And may you sense the light around the very old and very young. May you go ahead and quit what you should never have begun. May we be released, may we be held dear, may we listen to the wisdom that we didn't want to hear. May we be